Welcome to my History of House Stark video. We're going to get into it today, people. We're going to talk about as many Starks as I can possibly cram in. We're going to go back to the very beginning and all the way up to the present day Starks that we meet on Game of Thrones. It all begins in this era called the Age of Heroes, which is thousands and thousands and thousands of years before the present day story. We have this man come along named Bran, and he was called Bran the Builder, and he is the founder of House Stark. When the Long Night happened for the first time, he and the other first men, they teamed up with people like the Children of the Forest, the Giants. They all combined their efforts to fight against the Long Night, and they succeeded. And then what happens after is Bran the Builder gains renown, not only for building Winterfell, but for building the Wall. Winterfell is the seat of House Stark, and yep, Bran built it from scratch, and it started small, and then they sort of added more and more to it. Now, I mentioned that Bran the Builder, he's there during the first Long Night with the other first men, which are the humans. And they are the first humans that we know of in this story who come from Essos. They invade Westeros, and they take the land from the Children of the Forest and the Giants and possibly some unknown mythical magical creatures that we've not yet met. So House Stark proudly trace their lineage back to the first men. Now, from Bran the Builder and his descendants, we get what is known as the Kings of Winter, sometimes called Kings in the North. They wear a fairly simple bronze crown. It has like first men ruins, inscriptions, like carved into the crown, and there's like 9 spikes on it, but it's a fairly simple, not flashy crown by any extent of the imagination. And what House Stark does is it starts to defeat the other petty kings around them in the north. The Barrow Kings, for example. The Starks defeat everybody kind of one by one to the point where they become the main house in the north. Now, in this video, there's going to be a lot of Brandons. Like, it's going to be a bit confusing. So I'm going to try and explain it as best I can. Because even when I was making my notes for this video, I was like, I'm sorry, how many Brandon Starks is there? It's a lot. So we have the first Brandon, Bran the Builder. Then we've got another one called Brandon the Breaker of House Stark. The story goes that he teamed up with a king beyond the wall called Yoramun, and they infamously teamed up to defeat the legendary Night's King. Not Night King from the TV show, but Night's King. Very different story. Then we had another Stark king, another king of winter, and this one was named Jon Stark, and he actually built the Wolf's Den in White Harbour, which was then lost under the leadership of another Stark king, King Edric Stark, who was also known as Snowbeard. Nowadays, the Wolf's Den is actually, it's been like converted into a prison. There is a branch of the family created called the Grey Starks, and they're now extinct, but at one point they lived in the Wolf's Den. Then the Starks kind of start getting into some disputes with the Arryns of the Vale. They were kings of the Vale at the time, and because of the geography, a lot of the time they would clash over this cluster of islands called the Three Sisters. The Starks and the Arryns went back and forth, fighting each other for ages, to the point where the Starks eventually just kind of like call it a day. In the north, the Starks continue to dominate, but it doesn't mean that they don't ruffle a few feathers along the way. At one point, House Greystark allied with House Bolton to basically rebel against the Starks. Now, the Greystarks are no more. They are extinguished. The Boltons, they eventually do bend the knee, essentially, and they survive. There's this guy in the family called Carlon Stark, and he's not the eldest. He's one of the younger siblings. He won't inherit Winterfell. He won't inherit the title of King of Winter. And so for his bravery and for his exploits, he's given land, and he basically forms his own little settlement, his own, well, he has his own keep, and that's the start of the Stark family. I mentioned the Boltons, who used to be these like red kings, and they were one of many petty kings in the north, and eventually they do acquiesce to the Starks, but it's not without trying to rebel a lot. Like, they don't like the Starks. Historically speaking, the Boltons don't love the Starks. They don't like playing second fiddle. There was a king called Harlan Stark who once lay siege to the Dreadfort for like 2 years, and eventually the Boltons admitted defeat. Another major part of Stark history is the constant struggles to protect their land as they see it from the free folk, the wildlings. Having the wall there, it's good in a sense. It is good, but people still do pass over the wall and there's still incursions. According to the legends, there was this story of a man called Bael the Bard, a king beyond the wall, and he has beef with the Starks and he crosses over the wall. He rocks up at Winterfell, charms everyone, and the next day the daughter of the king of House Stark is missing, and all that's left behind is a rose, a winter rose on her pillow. Unsurprisingly, it was yet another Brandon Stark who was the one who sent people to try and find his daughter to bring her home, but they had no success. They couldn't find her. Then one day she pops back up holding a child, the Bard's bastard, and this child would go on to succeed that King Brandon Stark, their grandfather. It's quite the tale, and it might just be a tale, but it's something that is part of the northern culture, the lore, the legends. Now, at some point, there is another King Brandon of House Stark. This one was known as Brandon the Shipwright. And yeah, it's pretty obvious why. We don't think of the Starks as like mariners. We don't think of them as seafarers per se, but Brandon the Shipwright loved to sail. Sadly for him, one day he sailed basically too far out into the Sunset Sea and never came back. And what happened next is he was succeeded by his son, who was another Brandon. This one was called Brandon the Burner because like the first thing he did was burn the remnants of his father's fleet, burn the shipyards, burn anything associated with ships, because he was just devastated that his father loved ships so much, loved sailing, and off he goes and never came home. In fact, there's an empty crypt still laying there, waiting for Brandon the Shipwright's remains to one day come home. Now, we don't know exactly what year this was, but there was another king of House Stark whose name was Roderick Stark. Finally, a little break from the Brandons. Now, according to the legends, to the histories, even though we don't, we can't rely on it 100%, the belief is that this Stark, Roderick Stark, he won Bear Island from the Ironborn, and then he gifted it to the Mormonts, and that's how they became to be the leaders of Bear Island. And another thing the Starks spent a lot of time doing was helping out the Night's Watch as and when they could, especially because of the close proximity to the Wall and to Winterfell. It was kind of an unspoken thing, like, you guys are nearest, if you have any spare people, we'd love to take them off your hands. Now, we have the names of lots of other Stark kings, but we don't know anything about them, their reign, the time they lived, any of that. So I'm going to just list a few of their names. We have 2 King Benjans of House Stark. One is Benjen the Bitter, and one is Benjen the Sweet. There is a Brandon the Bad. I want to know what he did to get that nickname. And this one might be my favourite, Edarion Stark, also known as Edarion the Bridegroom. Like, I want to know what that nickname's all about. But it's the case with a lot of these histories of the great houses. You have gaps and there are unknown people and you don't always know the connections, and sometimes it's a little messy. And then about 300 years before we join the story, we have King Torrin of House Stark, and he's the last king of winter, last king in the north, until Robb. Now, Aegon Targaryen has just launched his conquest of Westeros, and he fully expects the north to fall in line. Torrin leads his men south, and there's thousands of them on the march, but they've heard what's been happening elsewhere. The Field of Fire, what happened at Harrenhal, all of these things, it didn't fill them with confidence. And they knew, we're going up against the Targaryens and they've got dragons. King Torrin, he's getting reports about the Field of Fire where there's this 3 Targaryen dragons all fighting together at the same time. Like, what chance do you stand? They're hearing, this is what Harrenhal looks like. The day it opened, it was looking great. And Aegon and Balerion came and melted it. They know that the stakes are very high, and so Torrhen has a choice. He can either yield or he can fight. There's not really any in between. Now, some of his men, his banner men, were telling Torrhen, you know what, let's make a stand. You know, we could be at Moat Cailin. They'll never get past there. A lot of people wanted to put up a fight. Torrhen's illegitimate half-brother, Brandon Snow, he said, I've got a plan. I'm going to sneak across the river. I'm going to get into the Targaryen camp and I'll slay the dragons. And that way we stand a chance. And Torrhen was like, yeah, we're not doing that. So messages between the Starks, the Northerners, and the Targaryen camps go back and forth. And eventually Torrhen does agree to bend the knee to Aegon. And he goes from being King Torrhen of House Stark, King of the North, to now just being Lord of Winterfell, Warden of the North. It's a demotion. It's a humiliation, and we know that Torrhen didn't love it, but it had to be done. It was a necessary sacrifice. The way I see it, Torrhen took one for the team. He did this because he knew that if they put up a fight, the Targaryens could let loose their dragons on any northern settlement. They were not going to risk that, so he did this for his people. A lot of people abandoned Torrhen. A lot of people sort of walked away from him, went off and did their own thing. There was one group who formed their own sellsword company because they thought that Torrhen had been weak, that he'd given in too easily. So what's happening now is the realm is in a new era. With the exception of Dawn, everyone else is under the banner of House Targaryen. And this is the first time that Westeros has all come, again, with the exception of Dawn, under the leadership of one person, of one house. They used to be separate kingdoms, not anymore. One of the tactics the Targaryens used to help knit this new realm together was marriage. And Torrhen Stark, Lord Torrhen, he found out that Queen Rhaenys Targaryen wanted to betroth his daughter to Lord Ronal Arryn of the Vale. He used to be King Ronal Arryn until he and his mother understood without any words needing to be spoken, because Vhagar was right there. We're going to bend the knee. We are told that Torrhen was not thrilled about this match for his daughter. And I feel like he was probably still pretty salty about having to bend the knee, because a lot of people, even though he saved the North from harm, a lot of people complained about what he did. And he became known as Torrhen, the king who knelt. And that's not flattering. It's mocking him, and people don't seem to realise he saved you all, because if the dragons had been turned on you, we'd all be toast. What Torrhen Stark did, I think he's a saint. I think he's the best of the Starks. He took one for the team, didn't like it, but he did it anyway because it was for the greater good. He took a personal defeat, an embarrassment, a demotion. He did it because it was what was right for his people. And that's the sign of a true leader. That's the sign of a real one. So I like myself some Torrhen Stark. He's a good egg. Now, Torrhen was succeeded by... Can you guess? Yes, another Brandon of House Stark. This one was called Brandon the Boisterous. Kind of self-explanatory. Now, we don't know how he was exactly related to Torrhen. Could have been his son, but we don't know officially. Maybe a grandson, maybe a nephew. We're not sure, but we know that he came next. After him was a guy called Lord Roderick Stark. Then after him comes another Brandon. This one was Brandon the Boastful. You kind of have to give them these like nicknames because there's no way we're going to remember them all. Like, I have to think of it as like Bran the Builder, Bran the Burner, Bran the Shipwright. I have to think of them as Bran the because there's so many Brandon Starks. Now, after Brandon the Boastful came his son, Lord Walton Stark. He's most well known for giving aid to the Night's Watch when a bunch of brothers decided they wanted to rebel against their oaths to the Watch. Walton and loads of his men, they go north and they're in the haunted forest north of the Wall, and they are fighting and hunting down these deserters, these oath breakers. But the story goes that Walton Stark was set on by a bunch of giants, and apparently he was killed by... he killed some giants and then he was killed by giants. I think that's right. Either way, that was the end of Walton Stark. He sadly died but he was trying to help the Night's Watch. And you see that theme again of the loyalty the Starks show to the Watch. They are one of the very few houses that continuously respect the Watch. They're always encouraging recruitment. They do what they can for the Watch. They take the Watch seriously when a lot of the rest of the realm have forgotten about the real reason that the Watch is even there in the first place. Now, Walton Stark was succeeded by his younger brother, Alaric Stark. He was livid when he heard about his brother's untimely death. He wasn't ready to be Lord of Winterfell. What the hell's going on here? From Alaric's perspective, the crown should have done more to help the Night's Watch. That it should have been King Jaehaerys stepping up. Why did it have to be his brother? Because it cost him his life. Alaric felt the crown, the Targaryens, had dropped the ball and the Starks had to come in and clean the mess up. And matters weren't helped when the crown suggested that the Night's Watch needed more land. And originally, Bran the Builder, way back in the day, had given an area of land from the north. It's called the Gift, and this is given to the Night's Watch. But during the reign of King Jaehaerys, when Alaric was Lord of Winterfell, he was told basically, you're going to have to give up more of the north. Like, the gift that was already given was insufficient. They need more land. So for a time, things were kind of awkward between the crown and the Starks. Alaric Stark, he was between a rock and a hard place. Of course they wanted to help the Night's Watch. That's what the North had always done. That's what his brother had died fighting for. So he doesn't want that to be in vain. So of course they're going to continue to help the Night's Watch. And he does agree to this new gift begrudgingly, and it's the arrival, well, the visit of Queen Alysanne, who basically charms the living shit out of Alaric Stark and helps to bring the Starks and the Targaryens back onto better terms. Alaric goes from not even wanting Alysanne to visit Winterfell to then spending all this time with her, and then there were rumours that maybe they had a sneaky affair. After Alaric comes his grandson, Lord Edric Stark. And the fact that he's Alaric's grandson is pretty much all we know about Edric. We don't know if he had any sons of his own or anything like that. All we know is that he was eventually succeeded as Lord of Winterfell by a Lord Ellared Stark. And he was the head of House Stark during the Great Council of the year 101, where it was determined that Viserys would succeed King Jaehaerys when the day arrived. But the funny thing is, Lord Ellared Stark, he actually voted against Viserys. That was not his choice. He voted for the Velaryons, for Rhaenys and, well, by extension, her son Laenor. It makes you wonder, why did the Starks do this? I mean, did they do it because they really believed that that was the right thing to do, that that was the right choice? Or were they doing it just to kind of stick it to House Targaryen? It feels like there was not necessarily bad blood, but just a little tension, a little awkwardness between the Starks and the crown. The next Stark that is Lord of Winterfell is Lord Benjen Stark. Not Ned's brother, this is a different one from further back. Again, we don't always know the connections, like how each successor is directly related to their predecessor. Sometimes it's specifically stated that somebody was someone's son, but sometimes we don't know the exact link. So he could be a son of Ellared, or he could be a nephew or a brother. We don't exactly know. Lord Benjen Stark is then succeeded by his son, Lord Rickon Stark. You get a sense for these names that are popular in the Stark family. Now, Lord Rickon Stark, he had two sons, but we only know the name of one, which is Cregan. So you might know that name. You might be like, oh, that rings the bell, because Cregan Stark is the character on House of the Dragon. He's in the story in Fire and Blood. I suppose I should put a spoiler warning here, just because if you are watching this, you might not know what happens in House of the Dragon. I don't want to ruin that for anybody who's like waiting to see everything play out on TV. So here is a spoiler warning. I'm going to just cover my bases. So Cregan succeeded his father when he was only like a kid. He was like 13 years old, very young indeed. His other brother had already died. Cregan was kind of left with like the mean, nasty uncle, his uncle Bernard Stark. They didn't get along. Bernard was his regent until Cregan came of age, and they just did not mix well. When Cregan Stark came of age and he was able to assume the title and the responsibilities as Lord of Winterfell, like the first thing he did was have Uncle Bernard and his cousins arrested, rounded up. Cregan then married, he had a son of his own. Then war breaks out, the Dance of the Dragons, and you've got Seafarers flying to Winterfell, talking to Cregan saying, can we be confident you're going to be there? Like, do you have our back? You swore an oath. Do you still stick to that? Are you going to back Rhaenyra like you promised? There's a lot of talk about what went on when Jace was at Winterfell. Did he have an affair with Cregan's alleged possible illegitimate half-sister, who we don't even know really existed? But what we are told is that Cregan and Jace got on like a house on fire, that they just loved spending time with each other, that they were really close, all of that. They come to an arrangement that when Jace is married and has children, his firstborn daughter would marry Cregan's son, and the Starks and the Targaryens would be united and they'd become one great big happy family. The only sticking point really for Cregan is he says, yes, we will come and help Rhaenyra in this war, but first we have to go and collect the harvest. That can't wait. I can't let the North starve. In the meantime, Cregan does send a lot of his men, his commanders, people like Sir Roderick Dustin, aka Roddy the Ruin. He sends them south. So a lot of the northern contingent do make their way south and are active participants in the war. But Cregan himself actually doesn't see a whole lot of action. He's just gathering the harvest. He kind of rocks up when all the fighting is kind of over. Cregan, He's a northerner, he's a Stark, he's a man of his word. He promised that he would back Rhaenyra, and by this point, again, spoiler warning, I did tell you this, Rhaenyra's dead, and so is Jace. Most people in the story have croaked it in the war. Very few people actually do survive. And Cregan is like, well, you know what? I kept my word. I've come to King's Landing. I'm going to sort all this mess out. And we get this sort of 6-day window called the Hour of the Wolf, where Cregan is basically in charge and he's trying to work out what the hell has been going on. He tries to sort out the mess that happens. And I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I'll just say the mess that happens at the end of the war. He's trying to find out who's done what, who needs to be held accountable, what the hell's going on. Cregan wants justice. It's a point of principle. Now, thankfully, Cregan is one of the few Starks that goes south and actually does return north. And he goes back north with a new wife. But, and I'm not going to go into too much detail, but when we see this character on House of the Dragon, you know I'm going to just scream because I love her. Now, unfortunately, Cregan gets back to Winterfell and he's married and, you know, he's starting this new era, this new phase of his life. But then things go awry because this winter fever arrives in Westeros and the north is hit particularly hard. A lot of people lose their lives. There was even like people saying, well, maybe it's the cold, it's the blustery gales, it's the wind, it's the snow, it's the sleet. Maybe it's the north and that climate that helps spread the fever. At this point, the Starks were distracted. They were trying to help their people, try to stop the spread of this disease. And the free folk, the wildlings, they take advantage of that. Cregan has to stop what he's doing to go and deal with them. And he does. And he goes on to rule for many, many years. And he has multiple children with multiple wives. Cregan outlived his firstborn son, Rickon, and he had a few daughters, but they were passed over in favour of younger sons. Cregan Stark was succeeded by his son, Jonel Stark, who was known as One Eye, for obvious reasons. Now, Jonel did not have any children, so when he dies, the lordship of House Stark, the leadership role, passes to another of Cregan's sons, Barthagan Stark, aka Barth Blacksword. But sadly, he died without producing any heirs of his own. He was, basically what happened was the inhabitants of the Isle of Skagos invaded and Barthagan Stark has to go off and deal with them and he dies in the process. So another of Cregan Stark's sons inherits the lordship of Winterfell, Barthagan's next brother. Surprise, surprise, he was called Brandon. So this is yet another Brandon Stark, this one Lord. So this Brandon was the third of Cregan's sons to be Lord of Winterfell. This Lord Brandon Stark married a girl from House Karstark, and they had kids, and he was succeeded by his eldest son, Rodwell Stark. Sadly for Rodwell though, he didn't have any heirs of his own, so after his tenure as Lord of Winterfell, when he died, the lordship passed to his younger brother. This guy is called Beron, who is now Lord Beron Stark. Are you keeping up? It's a lot of names. I hope I'm explaining this all right. Like, please let me know in the comments if I'm explaining it enough. Like, am I actually breaking it down right? Please do let me know. Now, after Lord Beron Stark came his eldest son, a guy called Lord Donner Stark. Like, kebab. But sadly for Donner Stark, he died without having any heirs, which is, now I'm thinking of it, it's something that seems to happen every now and again with these generations of Starks. A lot of the time, brothers do tend to inherit. You can't rule out being the spare. So Beron's younger brother, Willem, becomes Lord Willem Stark. It's said that he had a son by his first wife, and that this was the child that old Nan came to Winterfell to be a wet nurse for. That is how she became part of the furniture. That is how she wound up serving House Stark in the first place. So there's a little bit of old Nan lore for you. Now, sadly, the child that she wet nursed for died as an infant, and then Willem Stark remarried, and then he had some other kids, and then he dies fighting against the wildlings. And to give you a bit of context, we're around 70, 80 years from where we join the story with Ned and Sansa and Kat and Robb and everybody. We're only a few generations out, so just to give you a bit of context. Now, Lord Willem Stark is succeeded by his son Edwyle Stark. And he married Lady Melantha of House Blackwood, one of the few houses in the south that still believe in the old gods, just like the Starks. And they had one son together, but it was a kind of important son, and his name was Rickard. Rickard is going to inherit Winterfell one day. He marries one of his cousins, I think it's a cousin once removed, Lyanna Stark, and they go on to have 4 children. And Lord Rickard Stark is very ambitious. He's got very big dreams for his children. The eldest is Brandon. Then you've got Ned, as in our Ned Stark. Then you've got Lyanna, and then Benjen is the baby. Rickard had this plan. Well, it was put into his head by his maester. The idea took root, the seed was planted, and Rickard wanted to arrange marriages for his children with other houses from the south. It's why his plan was called Southern Ambitions. It was basically, I'm going to marry my son Brandon into the Tullys, so that gets the Riverlands, in the fold. And then Ned, he's been fostered at the Eyrie, so he's really good pals with the Arryns. Then we've got Lyanna, we're going to betroth her to Robert Baratheon. That brings the Stormlands into the fold. We're not sure about what was going to happen with Benjen, but there would have been a plan for him to marry as well. The belief is that Rickard Stark had this desire to create an alliance, which would be a counterpower to House Targaryen, who was still on the Iron Throne at this time. Everything kind of goes to shit for House Stark with the tourney of Harrenhal. And this is where Lyanna is named Queen of Love and Beauty by Prince Rhaegar Targaryen as he goes past his own wife, Elia Martell. It was quite the scandal. I actually have been meaning to do a whole video about the tourney of Harrenhal. I really need to get on that because there's a lot to explain that I just can't cram into this video. But there was a lot of drama at this tourney, and the Starks were in the thick of it, put it that way. And what happens afterwards is Lyanna, rather than returning home to Winterfell, she vanishes. No one knows what happens to her. And Brandon is informed, big brother Brandon, is told, yeah, Rhaegar Targaryen has taken her. Now, taken might be a strong word. We don't know if he abducted Lyanna or whether she went with him willingly. It depends which story you believe. We don't know. It's a mystery. I think she went willingly, personally. I like to think that anyway. So Brandon freaks out and he rides to King's Landing and he wants answers. He demands that Aerys, the Mad King, explains what his son Rhaegar has been up to. Where is my sister? Like, what's going on? But Rhaegar is not in the capital and Aerys does not take too kindly to being yelled at by a subject. And he's not pleased. And the word reaches Winterfell, reaches Rickard Stark. There's drama with your kids. You better come to King's Landing because this is about to boil over. So Rickard Stark joins his son Brandon in King's Landing, but they are all, along with their men, seized by the Mad King and they are held prisoner. And eventually the Mad King kills Brandon and Rickard Stark. He actually kind of tortures them. It's a horrible ending. Brandon is struggling to free himself, and the more he struggles, the more he's choking, and then his father is being roasted above a brazier. It's one hell of a way to go out. It's pretty brutal. And it's basically how Ned becomes the new Lord of Winterfell. His father and brother are killed, and this is just before Robert's rebellion breaks out. And the Mad King, he's not satisfied with what he's just done to the Starks. He's just killed his Warden of the North. This is a big deal. But Aerys, for one reason or another, maybe he was frightened and thought that he had to go on the offensive. I don't know. He demanded that Jon Arryn send him the heads of Ned Stark and Robert Baratheon. And Jon Arryn refuses. He calls the banners. He's like, nope, we are going to put up a fight. We've had enough of this. Aerys, you've gone too far. No. And this is how Robert's Rebellion begins. Now, I'm not going to go into the details of Robert's Rebellion because I think that deserves its own video. What I will say is that Ned, he then becomes betrothed to the girl that Brandon was meant to marry, Lady Catelyn Tully. And there is a wedding in the middle of the war. Ned marries Cat and Jon Arryn marries Lysa. It's a double ceremony. And Catelyn gets pregnant pretty quickly, but Ned has to go back to war. But Ned and Benjen survive the rebellion. They are the two Stark brothers to survive. And Lyanna is found in this tower, the Tower of Joy, and she does not survive. And Ned remembers parts of this, but his memory is not perfect. And Lyanna makes him promise her something. We don't know what that something is, but Ned returns home to Winterfell with a child. So a lot of us do think that Lyanna Stark is the mother of Jon Snow, that Rhaegar Targaryen is his father, that Jon would still be illegitimate. Regardless of what we saw on Game of Thrones, he would be illegitimate if this is the case. However, because it's not explicitly stated that Lyanna admits that, yeah, this is my child and Rhaegar's the daddy, because of that, we can't rule out other theories. And one is that Ned might be the actual father, that he and Ashara Dane had a child. There's a lot of theories that branch off from this. Ned goes back home, he gets back to Winterfell, and he'd sent word to Riverrun where Catelyn was with baby Rob, who's just been born. It's safe, you can travel now, I'll meet you there, kind of thing. And Catelyn arrives at Winterfell with Rob in her arms and sees Ned with the baby, Jon Snow. And that's the beginning of their married life, really. Them living together as husband and wife. Robert Baratheon is king and Jon Arryn is hand of the king. And for a couple of years, everything is fine until the Greyjoys decide they want to rebel. And that's when Ned has to get involved, alongside Tywin Lannister, alongside Robert Baratheon. And part of the agreement at the end, part of the deal with Baelon Greyjoy to allow him to live, after his rebellion failed spectacularly, is that Ned Stark will take Theon Greyjoy as his ward. So Theon now lives at Winterfell and he is raised as per his status as a highborn son of a lord, even though a sort of disgraced one. He is still treated well and he is raised alongside the Stark kids. Catelyn and Ned obviously have Rob. Then along comes Sansa. And then after Sansa, we have Arya. Then after Arya, we have Bran. And then after Bran, we have Rickon, who's just the baby. And everything is fine. Everything's going swimmingly until events in King's Landing catch up with the Starks and Jon Arryn dies and Robert comes north. in part to ask Ned, I need you to come in and be Hand of the King. I need you to step up. And Ned feels like he has no choice. He has to go and protect his best friend because Robert is living in a viper's nest and it's not safe. And that's where we join the story, with Ned leaving Winterfell and going south and never coming home again. And then Ned gets wind of what's been going on and Ned winds up losing his head. Robb freaks out and he calls the banners, and Robb wants to avenge his father. He's like, I'm not letting this slide. But Robb Stark did not plan on becoming king in the north. That just kind of happened, and it's a gut-wrenching chapter in the book because Catelyn knows this is getting out of hand. People are getting carried away. People are making promises. Before you know it, they are all declaring Robb is king in the north, and Robb has to accept it. And things move very, very fast for the Starks. And I feel like I'm probably going to end this video here because I feel like if we talk about, the Red Wedding, that's its own video. If we talk about what's happening with Sansa and Arya, that's its own video. I feel like we're getting into other branches of the story. So I'm going to wrap things up with where we're at. And as things stand in the books, Ned Stark is dead. Catelyn Stark is dead, resurrected as Lady Stoneheart, but she's kind of a zombie. Robb Stark is dead. Sansa is still alive. She's in the Vale. Bran, he's alive. He's north of the Wall. Arya is still Arya's alive, first of all. She's at the House of Black and White. She hasn't left there yet. And Rickon is alive, as far as we know, on the Isle of Skagos with Osha. But that is the history of House Stark. I hope it was helpful. I hope it was informative. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly enjoy these history videos. It's literally like A Song of Ice and Fire and history are like my two favorite niches. So combining them and talking about the history of one of the great houses, I just love it. My degree is literally in history, so it comes in handy when I'm doing these videos. I hope you enjoyed this. Please let me know which house you'd like me to do a history of next. We could do another great house, or we could do a fairly small minor house. Just let me know in the comments.